The Parish farmhouse sat at the far edge of Willow Creek, a place where fog liked to settle and stay, as if hiding the property from the rest of the world. People drove past quickly, never slowing, never looking for too long. Everyone in town knew the stories, whispers that had been carried through generations about what happened behind those sagging porch rails and shuttered windows. But no one truly believed them, not until the first set of twins stopped looking like the children they were supposed to be. It began quietly, without alarms or warnings. On a rain-drenched night, the midwife who delivered the Parish twins stumbled out of the house, pale and shaking, muttering that she saw something no mother should see. The Parish parents kept the babies hidden for weeks, claiming they were too fragile to be seen. But the townsfolk talked. They talked about the midwife who quit her job the next morning, leaving behind a career of nearly 30 years. They talked about the strange shapes seen behind the curtains. They talked about how the Parish father stopped coming into town altogether. When the twins finally appeared in public, being carried to the family truck on a summer afternoon, the world seemed to stop for those who caught a glimpse. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Their eyes were too dark, too reflective, almost as if they absorbed light instead of catching it. Their skin had a strange pallor, a stillness that didn't belong to children. And the way they moved, turning their heads in perfect unison, sent a ripple of cold through anyone watching. People tried to explain it away. Illness, genetic anomaly, maybe just imagination. But imagination doesn't make infants turn toward sounds no human ear could detect. Imagination doesn't make teachers lock their classroom doors when the Parish car drives by. And imagination certainly doesn't explain why every new generation of Parish twins looked less and less human, as if the family was slowly drifting away from the species it once belonged to. Most families pass down heirlooms, old clocks, faded letters, silver jewelry. The Parish family passed down something else. Something ancient. Something whispered about in panicked tones. And though no one could say exactly when the bloodline had changed, everyone knew the truth the moment they saw those first twins step into the light. The first strange birth in the Parish family did not begin with terror or suspicion, it began with anticipation, the kind that fills a small, isolated town when a well-known family is expecting children. The Parish name carried weight in Willow Creek, not because of wealth or power, but because of how long their roots had been buried in its soil. Generations of farmers, quiet people, private people, the type who minded their own business and expected everyone else to do the same. So when Clara Parish became pregnant with twins, the community received the news with warm smiles, casserole dishes, and whispered hopes that the family line would continue strong. Yet beneath the polite surface, there lingered a quiet curiosity. Parish twins were common, almost eerily so. Every generation had produced them, as if some unseen pattern guided the family's blood. But no one expected what would happen next. The night of the birth arrived with a thunderstorm that rolled across the valley like a warning. The midwife, a woman who had delivered half the town's children, later said she felt a heaviness in the air even before she stepped foot inside the farmhouse. The wind rattled the windows, the candles flickered although no door was open, and the house carried a strange stillness, as if holding its breath. Clara's labor progressed normally at first, though she seemed unusually cold, shivering even under layers of blankets. Her husband, Thomas Parish, paced the room with restless energy, checking the door, checking the windows, checking something else, something the midwife couldn't identify every few minutes. When the first baby arrived, the midwife froze. The infant didn't cry. It simply opened its eyes, dark and reflective like polished stone, staring up with a focus no newborn should possess. The midwife waited for the first breath, the first wail, anything, but the child only blinked slowly, as if studying her. She forced herself to continue, trying to rationalize the unsettling feeling crawling up her spine. The second baby arrived minutes later, identical in its eerie silence, identical in its unnatural gaze. Their skin was pale, not the usual softness of newborn pale, but a muted, almost translucent shade that made their veins faintly visible beneath the surface. And their fingers, she noticed, were unusually long, curling around her wrist with a grip too strong for their size. Thomas refused to let her examine the babies further. He wrapped them both tightly and turned away, shielding them from the midwife's eyes as if afraid she might understand something she wasn't meant to. Clara looked dazed, unfocused, whispering that she couldn't feel the babies the way she expected to. The midwife left the farmhouse shaken, unable to explain what she had witnessed, feeling certain that what she saw was not a mere anomaly but the beginning of something deeply wrong. As the years passed, what had begun with one unsettling birth slowly revealed itself as a pattern far too deliberate to ignore. The Parish family had always been known for producing twins across generations, a curious trait that townsfolk joked about for decades, but after the night Clara Parish delivered her silent, strange-eyed infants, the pattern shifted into something far darker. At first, the changes were subtle enough that outsiders could reassure themselves it was coincidence or exaggeration. The next set of Parish twins, born to Thomas's sister Lydia, carried the same unsettling stillness, their eyes too dark and deep, as if reflecting not light but some hidden depth within. Lydia insisted they were simply quiet babies, but the way she avoided prolonged conversations and kept the curtains closed suggested she noticed something she did not want to confront. As each new generation arrived, whispers began threading through Willow Creek like vines creeping across an abandoned fence. The children didn't respond to lights the way normal infants did. Bright lamps made them turn away with an almost animal-like flinch. Their movements, even as toddlers, were perfectly synchronized, as though an invisible string tugged them into mirrored gestures. When they played, they preferred dark corners, observing rather than interacting, their faces unreadable and oddly expressionless. Teachers noticed it too but rarely said anything aloud. One described the twins in her class as too aware, a phrase she later regretted using because she couldn't explain what she meant by it. The Parish twins seemed to sense emotions before they were expressed, turning their heads toward someone's fear or discomfort with unnerving accuracy. With every birth, the twins drifted further from anything recognizable. Their limbs grew slightly elongated, not grotesquely, but enough that anyone looking too closely felt a shiver of unease. Their pupils appeared larger, swallowing most of the visible iris, making their gaze almost predatory in dim light. But it wasn't just physical traits that changed. Their behavior grew stranger, quieter, almost ritualistic at times. They slept little, spent long hours staring out windows at nothing in particular, and reacted to sudden noises with a calmness that felt wrong on children so young. Even their voices, when they finally spoke, came out soft and flat, like echoes rather than words. The oldest residents of town began recalling things they once dismissed. Stories from their grandparents about the Parish lineage, tales of an old pact or a curse whispered in the early days of Willow Creek. Whether truth or superstition, the stories resurfaced as the new generations of twins arrived, each pair more unsettling than the last, each birth reinforcing the sense that the Parish bloodline was quietly evolving or unraveling into something no one in Willow Creek had ever imagined. The discovery of the decades-old medical report did not happen dramatically. It was found by accident, tucked in the back of a filing cabinet at the old Willow Creek clinic during a routine renovation. Dusty, yellowed, and brittle at the edges, the folder bore a name that made the nurse who found it pause: Parish. The file was thick, too thick for a town as small as theirs, and inside it lay notes spanning nearly 40 years, written by a doctor no one in the town remembered clearly anymore. As the nurse flipped through the pages, her confusion turned into unease. The doctor had meticulously documented every Parish birth during his years of practice, and alongside each record were private observations that grew increasingly urgent. The earliest notes described the twins as peculiar but healthy, showing an unusual calmness and low reactivity for newborns. But as the years progressed, the doctor's tone shifted from curious to troubled. In one report, he detailed a pair of twins who did not respond to touch the way infants should, yet reacted instantly to sounds too faint for most people to notice. Another file mentioned a twin who stared at him with such intensity during an examination that he felt, inexplicably, as though the child understood his thoughts. He wrote that their eyes possessed a depth inconsistent with human development, a phrase he underlined twice. The doctor sought consultations with specialists in the city, but the responses were dismissive, chalking his concerns up to rural superstition or overwork. Still, he persisted, keeping detailed logs, sketches of physiological differences, and even charts mapping the gradual shift in bone structure he believed he was witnessing. The most disturbing section of the file was sealed in an envelope marked confidential. Inside, the doctor had written his final assessment, one he never dared speak aloud. He suggested that the Parish bloodline was undergoing a form of regression or mutation, something he could not categorize within known medical science. He hinted at the possibility of a hereditary anomaly that was intensifying with each generation, noting that the twins were drifting toward a pattern not aligned with standard human evolution. His last entry, dated just weeks before he abruptly left Willow Creek, revealed his growing fear. He believed something ancient, perhaps dormant in the Parish lineage, had reawakened. The nurse who discovered the file brought it to the current clinic staff, but the moment the Parish name was recognized, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. No one wanted to be the first to suggest what the doctor had implied decades earlier. No one wanted to confront the fact that the strange traits he had documented so carefully were still appearing in every new set of Parish twins, just as he had warned they would. The incident at the school began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day when nothing remarkable was expected to happen. The Parish twins, Elias and Avery, had been attending Willow Creek Elementary for only 3 months, yet the atmosphere in the building shifted every time they walked through the doors. Children who were usually loud and carefree grew quiet when the twins passed by, their conversations faltering as if an invisible chill had swept through the hallway. Teachers tried to remain professional, but even they found themselves glancing away from the twins' unblinking stares. There was something about the way the children moved, perfectly synchronized, never out of step, that made the air feel heavy around them. On that particular day, the 4th grade class was preparing for a fire drill. The alarm had not yet sounded, but the teacher was giving instructions when she noticed Elias and Avery sitting unusually still at their desks, their heads slightly tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. Before she could ask if they were all right, both children stood up at the exact same moment, turning their faces toward the windows lining the back wall. Their eyes darkened, the pupils widening strangely until almost no white was visible, and the room fell unnervingly silent. A few classmates shifted uncomfortably, whispering under their breath, but the twins didn't acknowledge anyone. Seconds later, the fire alarm blared. The shrill sound startled the entire class, even the teacher jumped, but the twins did not flinch. Instead, they began walking toward the door slowly, deliberately, their movements too smooth to belong to children. As the other students scrambled to line up, a sudden thud echoed from the hallway, causing several children to scream. The teacher rushed to the doorway and froze. A large bookshelf, bolted securely to the wall for years, had collapsed outward with no clear cause, scattering books everywhere. What unnerved her most was that the twins were already standing in front of it, untouched, staring at the fallen shelf as if they had expected it to fall. Some of the braver students claimed later that they saw the twins glance at each other right before the crash, a silent exchange that made their skin crawl. Others swore the twins were smiling, a faint, unnatural curve at the corners of their mouths. The janitor insisted he had tightened all fixtures the week before, and no structural issues were found afterward, yet the shelf remained a point of fear and speculation among the staff. For the rest of the school year, teachers quietly changed seating charts, keeping the Parish twins away from anything heavy or unstable, though no one dared speak openly about why they were afraid. The incident spread through Willow Creek within hours, and by evening, the town had settled into an uneasy consensus that whatever was happening with the Parish children was no longer something that could be ignored. The discovery of the grandmother's journal happened long after she had passed away, tucked inside a wooden chest in the attic of the Parish farmhouse, wrapped carefully in oilcloth as if someone had wanted it preserved yet hidden. It was Clara Parish's eldest daughter, Mara, who found it while searching for old baby clothes. The journal's leather cover was cracked, its pages yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting remained steady and deliberate, revealing a woman who recorded her thoughts with the precision of someone who feared forgetting the truth. Mara sat in the dim light of the single attic bulb and began reading the entries, expecting stories of farm life or family struggles. What she found instead made her breath catch in her throat. The early pages were normal enough, daily chores, crop failures, weather notes, but soon the tone changed. Clara's mother, Agnes Parish, wrote of strange symptoms she had noticed in her own newborn twins decades earlier, the same reflective eyes, the same unusual calmness. She described how the midwife refused to return after their birth and how the townspeople grew distant, watching their house with suspicion. Agnes had dismissed the whispers as superstition, but over the years, she documented behaviors that she could no longer deny were unnatural. The twins sensed things before they happened, seemed to communicate without speaking, and sometimes reacted to voices Agnes swore she hadn't uttered aloud. One entry described a night when she found her children awake and sitting at the foot of her bed, staring at her in complete silence, their faces blank and unreadable. She wrote that their presence filled the room with a pressure she couldn't explain, as though the air itself was listening. Another passage revealed that she had consulted an elderly neighbor, a woman who had lived in Willow Creek long before most families settled there. The neighbor told her a story one Agnes had never repeated outside the journal about the land on which the Parish farmhouse stood. According to the old woman, the soil carried a history older than the town itself, tied to a group of early settlers who had sought isolation for reasons no record ever fully explained. Whatever they practiced had left a mark, a legacy that clung to the land and the blood of those who remained. Agnes wrote of her growing fear that her children were not suffering from an illness but were instead changing in a way passed down from generation to generation. She hinted at a pact made long before her time, something whispered in fragments through her family line but never spoken openly. The later entries grew increasingly frantic, as though Agnes felt the transformation accelerating in her children, and she confessed feeling helpless to stop it. When Mara closed the journal, her hands were trembling. She knew she should burn it or hide it again, but something in the words felt too connected to what she had already seen in her own nieces and nephews. The journal didn't provide answers, only confirmation that the changes in the Parish twins were not random, not new, and certainly not accidental. The abandoned farmhouse had always loomed at the edge of the Parish property, a structure avoided even by the most curious children of Willow Creek. Its windows were shattered in places, boards warped and splitting, and the porch sagged under decades of neglect. Yet despite its dilapidated appearance, locals often whispered that the house was not as empty as it seemed, that the air around it carried a weight no mere ruin could explain. It was in this building that the deepest secrets of the Parish family had been hidden, kept away from the town, from friends, and even from extended relatives who were not privy to the inner workings of the bloodline. When one of the younger Parish cousins, driven by equal parts rebellion and curiosity, ventured inside, the air immediately grew heavy, almost viscous, pressing against the chest in a way that left a lingering sense of dread. The interior was a museum of generations, though not one of ordinary family life. Faded photographs lined the walls, depicting twins of every age, each pair subtly different, each portrait growing stranger as the decades passed. Some had eyes that seemed impossibly dark, some postures that appeared unnatural, and the clothing styles marked decades of change, yet the twins' peculiar features remained consistent. In the corners, trunks and locked cabinets suggested that the family had been careful about what it wanted to preserve and what it wanted buried. As the cousin explored, he stumbled upon a locked door at the back of the house. It was reinforced, not simply a pantry or storage closet, but a hidden room, the kind of place that seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as though the house itself wanted to warn intruders away. After hours of trying to force it open, a sudden, almost imperceptible click allowed the door to swing ajar. The cousin found a room carefully preserved, untouched by time in some areas and decayed in others, where items were arranged methodically on shelves and tables. Glass jars held substances unidentifiable at first glance, some dark, some clouded with sediments, and stacks of old papers and notes were tied together with faded ribbon. At the far end of the room was a series of small cribs, each containing dolls that mimicked the appearance of Parish twins from previous generations, their features exaggerated in ways that made the heart race, long fingers, oddly wide-set eyes, expressions frozen between human and something else entirely. It became clear that the family had been documenting or even experimenting with the traits of their children for decades, keeping detailed records of each generation's deviations. The cousin left the farmhouse with an understanding that what had been kept there was not meant for outsiders. Yet the sight of the room lingered, the quiet presence of those dolls and the carefully catalogued notes haunting the mind, hinting at a darkness preserved across generations, a meticulous secrecy designed to protect a reality too unsettling for anyone outside the family to witness, and something told him that the true horror was only beginning to reveal itself. The disappearance of the twin, Samuel, shook the Parish family and the entire town of Willow Creek in a way that ordinary explanations could not account for. It began on an ordinary afternoon, when the children were playing near the creek that bordered the family's farmland. Samuel and his twin sister, Lillian, had been inseparable since birth, always mirroring each other's movements, speaking in whispers that sounded more like echoes than words. That day, their play was no different than any other, with sticks and leaves forming imaginary castles and kingdoms. But then Samuel ran toward a shallow bend in the creek, his movements unnaturally precise, almost predatory, and moments later, he was gone. Lillian, though terrified, did not cry. She simply stared at the water's edge, her gaze fixed on a point that no one else could see, her body unnervingly still. The family searched frantically, calling his name across the fields, dragging the creek bed with ropes and nets, but there was no trace of him. Hours passed, and the town's volunteer search party joined in, combing through woods and farmland, their flashlights cutting through the thickening dusk. Dogs sniffed and whined at the boundaries of the property, yet even they refused to enter a particular patch of forest near the edge of the creek. It was as if something unseen warned them away. Thomas Parish, Samuel's father, refused to give up, but even he began to feel the creeping sense that this was not a case of a child wandering off, it was something else entirely. By the next morning, the search had become desperate, yet no signs of Samuel were found. His disappearance left a void in the house that could not be filled, and Lillian's behavior shifted almost immediately. She stopped speaking in full sentences, opting instead for long stares, her eyes wider than normal, reflecting light in a way that reminded the family of Samuel's gaze when he had been born. She began repeating his movements and habits with unsettling accuracy, walking and tilting her head as he used to do, sometimes pausing mid-step to listen to sounds that no one else could hear. The townspeople whispered, some privately suggesting that the family had done something unnatural, while others claimed the creek itself had claimed him, a place rumored to be cursed or enchanted long before the Parish family settled nearby. In the days that followed, Lillian's quiet mirroring of her missing twin intensified. She would sit by the creek for hours, humming softly, her face pale and expressionless, sometimes pointing to shadows in the trees as if Samuel were there, though invisible to all others. Those who observed her closely felt the same cold pressure that had always accompanied the Parish twins, a sensation that what was lost was not gone, but something beyond the human realm had begun to reach through the children, linking the present with generations of secrets the town had only begun to glimpse. The town's attempt to intervene began as a mixture of fear and curiosity, a collective effort born from the unsettling events surrounding the Parish family that had grown too strange to ignore. Rumors had spread like wildfire, stories of twins with unnatural eyes, movements that mimicked each other with eerie precision, and the whispered account of a child who had vanished without explanation. A small group of townspeople, including teachers, neighbors, and a few older residents who remembered the earliest generations of Parish twins, decided they could no longer stand by and watch in silence. They approached the farmhouse one late afternoon, when the sun hung low and shadows stretched long across the property, casting the house in a menacing silhouette. Their goal was not hostile confrontation but understanding, a desire to see the children for themselves and perhaps uncover the truth that had been hidden behind closed doors for decades. As they reached the porch, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against their chests, filling their lungs with a weight that was almost physical. The front door opened before anyone could knock, and Thomas Parish appeared, his face pale, eyes wide, and hands trembling slightly, though he smiled with a forced calm that did not reach his gaze. The group hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances, sensing immediately that whatever lay beyond that threshold was not ordinary. He invited them inside, and the dim interior seemed almost to swallow the light of the setting sun. The twins were present, sitting quietly on the worn rug in the center of the parlor, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the lamps in a way that unnerved every visitor. The townspeople attempted small talk at first, asking about the children's schooling, their health, and their activities, but every question was met with silence or a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of the twins' heads. It was then that one of the older residents noticed movement in the corner, where the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, as if the very walls were alive. The twins rose in unison, stepping toward the adults with a fluidity that defied explanation. Their eyes seemed to pierce through everyone in the room, and a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. The adults froze, a cold dread settling over them as if the room itself had contracted around the children. Thomas Parish's face tightened, and he whispered something under his breath in a language no one recognized. The twins paused, tilting their heads again, and then the air shifted so suddenly that some of the visitors stumbled backward. The realization hit them all at once. The Parish family was not merely hiding strange children, they were guardians of something far older and far darker than any of them had imagined, something that had grown silently through generations, and the moment of confrontation revealed that whatever they had hoped to understand could not be approached with human reasoning alone. The night of transformation arrived quietly, without warning, though the atmosphere around the Parish farmhouse had been thick with tension for weeks. Neighbors reported a peculiar stillness that evening, even the wind seemed to pause, and animals in the vicinity refused to leave their pens, huddling together as if bracing for something unseen. Inside the house, the twins Elias and Lillian were unusually restless, pacing in tandem across the worn wooden floors, their movements precise, deliberate, and synchronized in a way that felt almost ritualistic. Clara and Thomas Parish remained in the shadows, speaking in hushed tones, their faces tense, their eyes darting to the children as if both fearful and anticipating what was about to occur. Candles flickered across the room, casting long, trembling shadows that made the twins' elongated limbs appear even more unnatural. As midnight approached, the air seemed to hum, a low vibration that resonated through every surface in the house, as though the building itself were aware of what was about to unfold. The twins stopped at the center of the room, standing shoulder to shoulder, and the sound grew sharper, piercing the ears of anyone present without a visible source. Lillian raised her head first, her eyes reflecting an impossible darkness that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Elias followed, matching her movements with perfect symmetry. Their voices rose together in a strange, harmonic tone that seemed almost alien, a resonance that reverberated through the walls and floors, and the atmosphere in the room thickened to a tangible weight pressing against the adults. Then, subtly at first, their features began to shift. The shape of their skulls elongated slightly, the eyes grew even darker, swallowing the irises completely, and their skin took on a faintly translucent sheen that revealed veins and muscle beneath in a way that was unsettlingly precise. Fingers stretched, bending at unnatural angles, and their postures straightened in a way that suggested both agility and power beyond their human years. The changes were not violent, but gradual, deliberate, and precise, a metamorphosis that made it impossible to look away. Clara gasped, instinctively shielding her face, while Thomas's hands shook as he whispered fragmented prayers under his breath. Outside the farmhouse, a distant observer might have noticed the windows glowing faintly despite the absence of electricity, a strange, pulsating light emanating from within. Inside, the twins had begun moving in patterns that seemed almost ceremonial, tracing shapes in the air with elongated limbs, their harmonic voices weaving together in a way that suggested communication on a plane humans could not comprehend. Any sense of childhood innocence had vanished. What stood in their place was something entirely other, a lineage of the Parish family that had been quietly evolving through generations, now revealed in its full, horrifying clarity, and the parents could only watch, powerless, as the final stage of the transformation unfolded. The final decision weighed heavily on the Parish family, pressing on them like a storm that had been gathering for generations, the tension so thick it seemed to seep into every corner of the farmhouse. The events of the past weeks had escalated beyond anything they could ignore. The disappearance of Samuel, Lillian's unsettling behavior, the inexplicable transformations of the remaining twins, and the discovery of long-hidden journals, reports, and artifacts that traced the family's history of unnatural births. Each revelation brought with it a haunting clarity. The lineage they had inherited was not ordinary, and the path forward demanded a choice that none could make lightly. Thomas and Clara sat in the dim parlor, the twins quietly observing from the center of the room, their elongated shadows stretching across the walls as if marking the gravity of the moment. They understood, instinctively, that whatever decision they made would shape not only their lives but the course of the family bloodline forever. On one hand, there was the instinct to protect. The Parish family had always been secretive, guarding their children and their heritage from outsiders who could neither understand nor accept it. For generations, they had concealed their anomalies, hidden them from the town, and endured whispers and rumors that only grew louder as the twins' differences became more pronounced. To preserve the lineage meant continuing the cycle, allowing the twins to exist as they were, and trusting that the next generation might carry forward the same strange legacy. It was the safer option in the sense that it maintained the family's secrecy and avoided immediate confrontation with the outside world. Yet even as this path tempted them, the weight of moral responsibility pressed in from every direction. The other path was far darker but promised a definitive end. To intervene, to break the cycle, would require confronting the very essence of the transformation, disrupting the natural course of the bloodline in ways they had never dared before. It meant deciding between their love for the children and the fear of what the twins were becoming, weighing human morality against the inheritance of something beyond human comprehension. Clara's hands shook as she considered it, glancing at the twins whose eyes now held the depth and awareness of something not entirely human. Thomas could feel the strain pulling at his mind, the echoes of decades of family secrecy, the warnings documented in long-forgotten medical reports, and the tremors of generations who had carried the same burden in silence. Voices from outside the family pressed against their walls, neighbors who had begun to suspect, the curious who would never rest, and the faint, almost imperceptible sense that nature itself recoiled at what the Parish children had become. The twins watched, waiting, as though aware of the deliberation, their movements subtle but precise, as if offering judgment without speech. The final decision demanded more than courage. It demanded an understanding of forces that were not entirely human, a confrontation with history, blood, and legacy that no one alive had faced before, and in that moment, Thomas and Clara realized that whatever choice they made would irrevocably define the Parish family for generations to come.